One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Kansas versus West Virginia. Kansas and West Virginia step into this one looking like two very different versions of good. Kansas is sitting at 11-4, and that wild comeback against TCU was not just a win, it was a personality test they somehow aced. Down big late, crowd tight, clock bleeding, and they still found a way to turn a loss into a 104-100 overtime victory, which tells you a lot about their ceiling and their nerve. That kind of game can create a bit of market noise because people remember the chaos and forget the structure underneath, but it does quietly confirm something important about this group. They have another gear when the moment asks for it. If you zoom out from the drama and look at the season profile, Kansas is a pretty classic heavyweight that has already taken a few jabs. The overall picture is a top-tier defense giving up right around the mid-60s per game against Division I teams, paired with an offense that comfortably lives in the mid-70s, which leaves them with a healthy double-digit scoring margin over the full sample. That is not the profile of a team that needs miracles every night. That is the profile of a team that usually wins the math on shot quality, shot selection, and free throws, even when the box score looks messy in spots. And honestly, that kind of underlying consistency tends to travel better than a cute underdog story. The Big 12 start shows both sides of them in a hurry. They lost at UCF in a game where the defense leaked more than usual, then turned around and played that track meet thriller with TCU where both teams blew past 80 in regulation and the final landed on that 104-100 score in overtime. So you have this funny dual reality. On paper, they are a top-tier defensive outfit, but in the first two league games, the tempo and the shot-making dragged them into faster waters. That is actually useful for this matchup, though, because it tells you they can survive and even thrive if West Virginia drags them into a grind or if the game suddenly opens up and turns into a mini run-and-gun stretch. West Virginia, on the other hand, is sitting at 10-5, and the vibe could not be more different. They just beat Cincinnati 62-60 in a game that looked like it was played inside a phone booth. A lot of body blows, very little space, and every possession feeling like it mattered a little too much. That fits who they have been so far, a defense-first outfit that wants this game in the mud, with possessions stretched out and the crowd living on every defensive stop. And that crowd is a real factor. They have yet to lose at home this season, sitting on a perfect home record with a long list of visitors who walked into Hope Coliseum and walked out with somewhere between 50 and 50-something on the scoreboard. You do not need to memorize every opponent to understand the pattern. The environment plus the scheme plus the pace has turned that gym into a place where teams suddenly forget how to score. It feels a bit like playing a fence with ankle weights on. Here is the thing, though, the home splits sit on top of a schedule that has been softer at home than in those neutral site and road games. When West Virginia stepped up in weight class away from Morgantown against teams with Kansas-level talent, those games stopped looking like defensive clinics and started looking like real coin flips or outright losses. So there is a tiny bit of smoke and mirrors baked into their overall dominance if you only stare at the home undefeated line without checking who they were actually beating. Matchup-wise, stylistically, you have a very clear tug of war. West Virginia wants to slow this into a half-court grinder, bleed the shot clock, and make Kansas stare at a set defense every trip. Kansas, even though the numbers say they guard at a high level, is much more comfortable flowing into offense earlier in the clock, using early actions, and putting pressure on opponents over the full 40 minutes, not just in the last 10 seconds of a possession. If this game tilts toward nervy, late shot clock half-court possessions all night, that naturally narrows the margin for the road team. If it tilts even a little toward Kansas getting to play in semi-transition and forcing West Virginia to defend in space for long stretches, it starts to look a lot more like the kind of matchup where their deeper talent wins pockets of the game by 6, 8, 10 points at a time. Now, markets are basically telling you what the computers think of that tug of war. Books have Kansas installed as a short road favorite, roughly a 1 or 2 possession edge on the spread, with the total hanging in the low 130s. On a neutral court, that implies a noticeably bigger gap between these two teams, and the number is accounting for the home crowd, travel, and all the usual Big 12 road noise. So if you think West Virginia is actually closer to Kansas on a true strength scale than those bigger neutral site projections would suggest, you have a reason to lean into the dog story and the loud gym. If you think the perfect home record has been helped along by the schedule and by opponents that cannot punch at Kansas's offensive weight, then the small favorite tag on Kansas starts to look a bit cheap. There is another small thing here that matters over 2 hours, and not just as a stat in a preview. Kansas does not need to live and die by one specific thing to build a margin. They are comfortable playing inside, comfortable getting to the line, and they have enough shooting to punish you if you overhelp. West Virginia's formula is a little more fragile: long defensive possessions, low scoring totals, and a crowd that feeds on that tension. If that defensive control slips even a bit, and this turns into a game where they are suddenly chasing from behind, their offensive profile is not really built for quick catch-up runs against a top-tier opponent. All of that, blended together, points us toward one side of this number, even while respecting how tricky Morgantown can be for any visitor. As our first pick for this matchup, the Kansas Jayhawks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. This total in the low 130s is quietly the most interesting number on the board. On paper, this looks like a how does this not crawl under kind of game. West Virginia is sitting among the very best scoring defenses in the country, allowing just over 61 points per game, and that is not a typo. That is genuinely elite in the modern college game. Kansas is not far behind, landing in that top-tier cluster by opponent scoring as well, and over the season their average game looks like something where they can win comfortably without needing to get into the 90s very often. If you only stare at those season-long defensive numbers, a total sitting in the low 130s almost looks generous to the under. But context matters, especially when we talk about pace and how these games really breathe minute to minute. Kansas is coming off back-to-back Big 12 games where the opponent cracked 80 in regulation, and one of those turned into that 104-100 carnival against TCU. That does not suddenly make them a bad defensive team. It just tells you that once they face high major athletes who can shoot, run, and stretch the floor, the game can speed up more than their season averages suggest. West Virginia has already seen something similar in league play, giving up 80 at Iowa State in their conference opener, then locking Cincinnati into that 62-60 rock fight a few days later, so even their defensive dominance has shown some variance when the schedule jumps in difficulty. At home, West Virginia's defensive control has been real, not imaginary. They have repeatedly held visitors in that uncomfortable 50-something range, including a few teams that are not totally helpless on offense. But there is a meaningful difference between facing that early season slate and facing a Kansas offense that can create easy looks in multiple ways and does not panic when the first action gets taken away. Over 90 to 100 possessions of basketball life in this one. That means the Mountaineers probably cannot count on this turning into a 48-45 rock fight, no matter how much the crowd might enjoy that. Here is the subtle part that actually pushes this total discussion. Both defenses are good, yet both teams also have clear paths to free points. Kansas has shown they can live at the free throw line in big games, and a physical home defense like West Virginia's is always flirting with foul trouble if the whistle tilts even slightly toward protecting drivers. Free throws with the clock stopped are the quiet enemy of an under, especially when both coaching staffs are comfortable using fouls strategically in the last couple of minutes to extend the game. You can play 35 minutes of beautiful, efficient under basketball and still watch the last 5 minutes torch that number if the margin sits in that awkward 4 to 8 point window. There is also the tempo tug of war inside the game, and this is where recent evidence matters a bit more than preseason labels. Kansas has already shown they are comfortable playing faster in pockets, either by pushing off misses or by flowing quickly into their half-court actions, and that is how you get a game that suddenly flips from slow grind to wait, how did we land on 104-100 in a blink? West Virginia will absolutely try to squeeze the air out of the ball, but even they are not immune to score effects. If they fall behind by more than a couple of possessions, they have to push a little harder, shoot earlier, and take a few more risks defensively. Those small tempo shifts do not show up in a basic season pace number, but they matter a ton when you are trying to land a total around 133 instead of, say, 127. So when you blend the elite on paper defenses with the recent Big 12 game flow, the whistle risk, the free throws, the emotional swings, and the simple fact that both teams are good enough to have a hot night on offense, that low 130s total starts to feel a bit fragile. It can absolutely fall short if everything stays slow, tidy, and clean, and it is worth saying clearly that any prediction about the exact scoring range is, by nature, speculative. But given what these two have actually shown in recent weeks, the more natural script involves just a few more made shots, a few extra trips to the line, and a final that lives closer to the mid-130s than the high 120s. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Tennessee versus Florida. This one in Gainesville feels less like a regular conference game and more like a checkup on where both programs really are right now. You have the reigning champs playing in a building where they basically refuse to lose, sitting at 10-5 overall with a perfect home mark, facing a Tennessee group at 11-4 that just punched Texas in the mouth but still has not proved much in true road gyms. Honestly, that is exactly the sort of setup where the point spread gets interesting, because the number sitting in that mid-single-digit favorite range is the book's way of asking how much you really believe in home court violence versus road poise. Florida's whole identity right now is built around that nasty ball label, which is just a polite way of saying they are happy to turn a basketball game into a wrestling meet for 40 minutes. They crash everything, they treat every missed shot like a loose fumble, and they have turned rebounding into a math cheat code, running up one of the biggest positive margins on the glass anywhere in the country and living on second chances. You saw it again against Georgia, where they bullied a top offense on the boards and in the paint, and that is not a one-off, it is their default setting right now. When you put that kind of style into a packed O'Connell Center with a 14-game home winning streak backing it, the physical edge tends to show up not just in the box score, but in how often they pull away from teams late rather than letting you sneak in the back door. Tennessee is good, no question, and if you just scroll through their schedule and see that 11-4 record, the resume looks clean enough. They have handled name opponents, they have the size and toughness to avoid getting pushed around, and their numbers on both ends of the floor scream top tier. Here is the thing though, most of their best work has come when they get to sleep in their own beds or play on neutral floors, and the few times they have stepped into a real SEC road environment this season, the results have been a lot shakier, both straight up and against the number. That matters in this specific building because recent history has not exactly been kind to them here, and now they walk into a noon tip against a fan base that just watched Florida lose a heartbreaker at Missouri, then respond by running off Georgia in front of a sold-out crowd. So if you strip out the name brands and just think about the matchup profile, you have a Florida team that manufactures extra possessions, piles up free throws, and already proved last March it can solve this Tennessee core in a high-stakes setting, now catching the balls in their first real taste of SEC road hostility this year. From a spread perspective, that is the side that checks more boxes, both in terms of how the game is likely to be played and how it tends to look on the scoreboard when Florida gets this crowd behind them for 40 straight minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the Florida to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. You have two offenses that live in the 80s on an average night, one of them sitting just under 85 points per game and the other just over 83, and neither group is shy about getting shots up early in the clock when they like the matchup. It is not the reckless, pick-up game kind of pace, but it is that very modern style where you do not waste touches, you hunt advantages quickly, and you make the opponent defend multiple actions every trip until something finally breaks. Florida's rebounding is sneaky important for the total because missed shots in their games do not mean empty trips. They often mean the defense has to survive the same possession twice. That constant second chance pressure tends to inflate both the shot count and the foul count, and you saw exactly that script against Georgia, where even a strong defensive effort on the first look still turned into a 92-77 final that sailed well past a typical college number. They did the same thing to Dartmouth and Colgate before league play, stacking up wins in the 90s and low hundreds while dragging opponents along for the ride just through raw volume and paint touches. On the Tennessee side, recent scores tell their own story, with that 100-plus explosion, the comfortable 80s, and the 85 they just put on Texas, and that is after an early stretch of the season where their schedule was doing them no favors at all. Their offense looks settled now, spacing is cleaner, and they are leaning into a style where they are happy to trade punches instead of trying to win some 65-60 grinder. Put that next to a Florida team that still owns one of the worst three-point percentages among power conference programs yet is scoring at an elite clip anyway, simply by turning every game into a war on the glass and at the rim, and you get a matchup that naturally leans toward more possessions that actually end in points, not empty trips. The market total sitting in the low 150s looks high on paper if you grew up watching 48-45 rock fights, but when you plug in the way Florida's home games have been landing, the way both teams are hitting the 80s consistently, and the late-game foul game that always shows up in a tight SEC contest on national TV, that number suddenly feels more like a challenge than a cap. If this plays out with Florida's usual shot volume, Tennessee's current offensive rhythm, and the kind of whistle you tend to get in a physical, ranked team showcase, it is hard not to lean toward a higher scoring outcome than the line suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. DePaul versus UConn. This matchup looks like one of those games where the spread feels outrageous at first glance. Then the more you look at how these two teams actually win, the more that number starts to make uncomfortable sense in your gut. You have UConn at home, sitting at 15-1 overall and 5-0 in Big East play, rolling into People's Bank Arena with that very particular blend of confidence and annoyance that comes from surviving an overtime circus on the road just days earlier. They are not just a good team, they are the kind of operation that treats home games like scheduled business meetings, the sort of meetings where the other side does a lot more apologizing than talking. UConn's whole identity this season leans into that idea of slow, steady domination rather than chaos. They score around 80 points a night, they hold opponents in the low 60s, and they win by roughly 17 on average, which is not a normal thing for a major conference team playing a real schedule. It is the kind of statistical profile that shows up on sites like KenPom and makes analytics people nod quietly. And it shows up on the floor as this constant pressure, possession after possession, like a full-court press that never quite ends even when they are back in the half court. They do not need to play fast to bury you, which is what makes a spread around 19.5 such a headache for anyone thinking about grabbing the underdog. Now drop DePaul into that picture. To their credit, the Blue Demons are not the automatic laughingstock some people still expect when they see the logo flash at the bottom of the screen. They sit at 10-6, 2-3 in the league, and they have actually been leaning on defense more than offense, trying to turn games into something closer to a Big East street fight than a highlight reel. We have seen it recently. They dragged Georgetown into a second half where the Hoyas could barely buy a basket, and they used that same defensive stubbornness to knock off Xavier while playing the game at their preferred, slightly sandpaper pace. It is gritty, it travels reasonably well, and it makes them annoying in the exact way you would want if you are a double-digit underdog walking into a sold-out building on national TV. Here is the problem for DePaul. That script works a lot better against teams that are either small, inexperienced, or happy to be in a rock fight with you. UConn is none of those things. When the Huskies get into these grinded-out games, you can almost feel them smiling a little because it lets their size, depth, and structure shine through even more. Every 4-minute media segment becomes its own mini-game, and UConn just tries to win each one by 3 or 4 points, like they are chipping away at a wall rather than kicking it down in one go. Over 20 or 30 minutes, that kind of approach quietly turns a close game into the kind of scoreboard that makes fans at home wonder how this was ever a single-digit spread in the morning. We already saw a cleaner, lower-stress version of this in the first meeting in Chicago. UConn, playing without its leading scorer solo ball, messed around early, turned it over, looked human for about 20 minutes, and still walked out with a 72-54 win once they tightened the screws after halftime. They barely had to raise their voice to cover that smaller road number. Now shift the rematch to Hartford, drop it in a building where UConn has been rolling through opponents for years, give them last change on every matchup, and throw in a DePaul team whose recent success has come more from defending than from detonating offensively. That is the sort of environment where UConn's habits usually take over, where they lean on you with physicality, wear out your legs, and let the crowd handle the intimidation part while the scoreboard quietly creeps away possession by possession. The history between these two is not subtle either. UConn has dominated this series, winning 21 straight and sitting at 22-1 all-time against DePaul, and that kind of track record is not just trivia, it is a reminder that this gap is structural, not just about one hot season. And when you pair that with a current UConn group that just erased an 11-point deficit in the final 3 minutes on the road and then finished the job in overtime, you are talking about a team that has already shown it does not relax, even when things get weird. So when you look at this big number at home, with this specific favorite, against this specific underdog that tends to sag into the low 60s when it steps up in class, it stops feeling like a trap and starts feeling like the logical extension of who these teams are right now. As our first pick for this matchup, the UConn Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total is where things can get sneaky for bettors who just watched UConn hang 103 in that overtime thriller at Providence, and are still seeing flames every time they close their eyes. That game felt like a YouTube mixtape in real time. 18 made threes from UConn, wild shot making, late game madness, and 5 extra minutes that took a solid offensive performance and turned it into a statistical fever dream. If that is the only UConn box score you have checked this week, it is easy to start imagining another fireworks show here, especially against a DePaul team that just dropped 86 on Xavier. But if you strip out that Providence outlier and look at the broader pattern, the picture starts to calm down a bit. Most nights, UConn plays like a team that is perfectly okay with boring scorelines, at least by modern Big East standards. They guard at a high level, they keep opponents stuck in the low 60s on average, and they run an offense that is efficient but not obsessed with pace for its own sake. Think more methodical chess match than pickup game at Rucker Park. They will run when it is there, sure, but a lot of the time they are happy to work through their sets, hunt the best shot, and let their defense handle the heavy lifting. DePaul, interestingly, is on a similar wavelength in terms of game shape, just from the underdog side of the equation. Their improved defense has become a kind of personality trait, and when they are at their best, games start to feel cramped, with long possessions, contested looks, and score lines that would make an NBA fan check the channel to see if the remote is broken. Yet, even when they have a night where the offense comes alive, like against Xavier, you can still see that their most realistic blueprint against a heavyweight is to drag the tempo down, not speed it up. Against a team like UConn, trying to trade early shot clock jumpers would be like bringing a Nerf gun to a firing range. We also have a pretty clean reference point sitting right in front of us, that 72-54 first meeting in Chicago. 126 total points, and it did not feel like either side massively underachieved what they were trying to do. UConn built a steady lead, tightened defensively as the game went on, and DePaul struggled to find efficient looks once the Huskies settled into their coverages. Nothing about that flow screamed unsustainable fluke. If anything, it looked like a preview of the kind of script that suits both teams' instincts in this matchup. Now picture how this type of game usually unfolds when the stronger team is at home and in full control. If UConn gets separation, their natural tendency is to manage the game, lean on their depth, and let the clock work for them rather than pushing the tempo just to make a point on national TV. Garbage time threes and bench-heavy stretches certainly can add noise late, but more often than not, the leader's priority turns into staying healthy, securing the result, and getting out without drama, not turning it into a track meet for style points. On the other side, DePaul's best-case script here still involves a slower pace, long defensive stands, and a hope that a handful of ugly possessions can keep things interesting. Put that together with a total sitting in the mid-130s, and you are looking at a game that has every reason to lean toward control and composure on the scoreboard rather than chaos. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Houston versus Baylor. Here we go, Houston and Baylor meeting in Foster Pavilion on a Saturday, packed into that 7,000-seat box that feels closer to a pressure cooker than a basketball arena. You have Houston walking in at 14-1, sitting 7th in the country, riding a streak of 15 straight true road wins, and sitting at 2-0 in Big 12 play. On the other side, Baylor is 10-4 overall and 0-2 in the league, but they are doing it with a retooled roster that has been lighting up scoreboards, living around 91 points per game against Division I teams, and popping even higher when you factor in some of those early blowouts. On paper, it sounds simple, an elite top 10 defense with a top 30 offense from Houston that loves to drag every opponent into a slow-tempo rock fight around the mid-60s in possessions, and hold teams near 60 points, taking on a Baylor attack that lives in the top 15 nationally for offensive efficiency and likes to play faster, closer to 70 trips a night with more of a let-us-race mindset. The betting market has leaned into that storyline, with Houston priced as a small road favorite and Baylor grabbing a few points at home, even though Baylor has gone 8-1 straight up in its last 9 in this new building, and Foster Pavilion has already shown it can feel like one of the most hostile, intimate setups in big-time college hoops. Houston is rolling in off 2 bruising games against Cincinnati and Texas Tech, the kind that demand every ounce of their physical, tough identity, while Baylor has already been punched in the mouth by TCU and has had to stare at that 0-2 league start as a not-so-gentle reminder that talent alone is not enough. So what you really get here is a Baylor team that is both desperate and loaded, settled into its new home, backed by a crowd that is going to treat this like a mini national stage game, lining up against a Houston group that everyone knows and trusts because they play like a bar fight in sneakers and rarely beat themselves. Baylor's offense is built to stretch even a great defense side to side with spacing and then slam the ball vertically at the rim. And they finally have enough size and strength inside so they are not just getting shoved around on the glass the way Houston has done to so many opponents in recent seasons. And while Houston absolutely owns the defensive chops to walk into any building in the country and get stops, this specific spot is asking them to handle a short favorite role on the road against a top-tier offense that is fully stocked in a gym that was literally designed to turn up the noise and squeeze opponents for 40 minutes. Honestly, that is the kind of situation where the betting value often lives on the uncomfortable side, the hold your nose and ride with the home underdog that makes people a little nervous, and that is exactly where we are planting our flag for this one. As our first pick for this matchup, the Baylor Bears to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. This matchup feels like a tug of war between what these teams usually want and what this environment might pull out of them. On paper, Houston looks like every underbetter's favorite friend, a defense sitting near the top 5 nationally in points allowed per 100 possessions, holding opponents to just over 60 a night, and running one of the slowest tempos in major college basketball. A lot of their games feel like someone turned the shot clock into an hourglass and dared you to score before every grain of sand hits the bottom. Here is the thing though, this version of Houston quietly scores more efficiently than most people give them credit for. They profile as a top 30 offense by the advanced numbers. They have multiple ball handlers who can punish switching, and they are strong at the free throw line, knocking down a good percentage when they get there as a group. Across from them, Baylor's offense is anything but shy. They push the pace more than Houston. They space you out. They make you guard shooters and drivers all over the floor, and that is why they sit in the top dozen in offensive efficiency and hang around 90 to 91 points per game with some ridiculous scoring bursts against non-conference opponents. The total has been set in that mid-40s range, and you can see why people might be torn. Houston's profile leans to lower scores while Baylor's track record suggests higher ones, and the contrast between slow grinding possessions and quick attacks is obvious. In a matchup like this though, with so much firepower on the floor and so much emotion in the building, it is hard to picture a simple 62-58 style score. Baylor's attacking offense and the home energy can nudge things a little faster. Houston's improved scoring punch can keep the scoreboard moving, and when a game stays tight late, you often get extended possessions, more whistles, and long strings of free throws that quietly stack points. Both teams are built to punish mistakes too. Baylor can turn a lazy closeout into a quick three or a run out. Houston can take a live ball turnover and turn it into instant points the other way. And that kind of trading of blows often nudges a total past the mid-140s once shot-making and late-game chaos take over the script. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Wisconsin versus Michigan. Wisconsin walking into Ann Arbor as a huge underdog in a basketball game already tells you this matchup is a little wild. You have Michigan sitting at 14-0, ranked near the very top of the polls, and sitting at the top of the big analytic boards with a top-tier offense and the #1 defense in the country. That is not a cute story. That is a team that has been steamrolling people. Neutral floor hammerings of Auburn and Gonzaga by 30+, those blowout wins over Villanova, LaSalle, and McNeese at home, and that 96-66 demolition of USC where the Trojans could not even score for the first 6+ minutes and coughed the ball up 21 times, all paint the same picture. Michigan does not just win, they have been turning decent opponents into training footage. On the other side, you have Wisconsin, which fits that familiar category of good, but not quite scary, that we keep seeing in the league. When the shots fall, they look dangerous enough. When they step up in class though, the cracks pop out fast, like that 90-60 beating at Nebraska, the 89-73 loss to Purdue, and the 76-66 result against Villanova. They just pulled out a nice win over UCLA at home, sure, but now they leave the comfort of the Kohl Center and move into Chrysler, where Michigan is 7-0 this season and has made covering spreads in front of their own fans look like a hobby. Michigan's core starting group tells a lot of the story. Elliot Cadeau, Nimari Burnett, Yaxel Lendeborg, Morris Johnson Jr., and Ade Mara have basically lived on the floor together, starting every game and never taking a loss as a unit so far. You get a true point guard who can orchestrate, a veteran scoring guard, and then a front court that looks like it was built in a lab for modern college hoops. Two 6'9" wrecking balls next to a 7-footer who sits top 10 in the country in rebounding and lives in that double-double range almost every night. That is a lot of size for any visitor to handle, let alone a Wisconsin team that already struggled physically in those big step-up spots. Wisconsin also has a sneaky depth concern here. Austin Rapp, their stretch forward off the bench, has been out recently with that quiet, undisclosed injury tag. He missed recent games and still sits in that annoying, questionable bucket. That has already pushed Greg Gard into riding his starters hard, like we saw in the win over UCLA. If he is limited again or does not go, that is one fewer body to throw at Michigan's front line and one fewer shooter to stretch the floor. Honestly, in a game where you are already a large underdog, that is the kind of detail that can tilt a competitive 10-point loss into one of those "welp, that got away from us" afternoons. There is also a fun, slightly petty coaching subplot baked in here. Dusty May recruited and coached Nick Boyd for years at Florida Atlantic and rode with him during that Final Four run before Boyd moved on and eventually landed at Wisconsin. May knows every comfort spot in Boyd's pick-and-roll game, every counter, every moment he likes to pull up versus drive. That does not mean Boyd will vanish. He is still a talented guard, but it does mean Michigan's staff can build a game plan that takes away his favorite reads in a way most opponents simply cannot. If you zoom back out and look at the big picture numbers, analytics treat this matchup like a heavyweight versus a solid mid-card fighter. Michigan sits at number 1 overall on the main predictive sheet. Wisconsin sits down in the 40s. The gap on the defensive side looks like a canyon. Oddsmakers still hung a massive number on this game, with Michigan sitting around 19.5-point favorites depending on where you check the app. That sounds huge for a conference matchup, but it is exactly the kind of team profile Michigan has been bullying. Wisconsin's offense leans on jump shooting. It just went 4 for 25 from deep against Purdue. It wants to play quicker than the old-school Badger pace, but it does not have the depth or the rugged size to win a 40-minute fistfight with this particular opponent. Now fold in the human side. Michigan had that one real scare against Penn State, sneaking out by only 2. A group this experienced, with a coach who has been pushing the standard over score message, usually responds to that kind of eyebrow-raising win with a locked-in, statement-level performance at home. So when you put together the gap in size, depth, current form, defensive ceiling, and even the coaching familiarity, it is very easy to see why a big spread is on the board and why it might still not be quite high enough. As our first pick for this matchup, the Michigan Wolverines to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The oddsmakers have slapped a total number in the mid-160s on this game, around 164.5 at most books, which is a pretty loud total for a Big Ten matchup in January. You are basically being asked to believe in something like an 89-76 style track meet. On the surface, that kind of script feels believable. Michigan is sitting around 95 points per game and had a stretch of about 97 per night over its last 5 heading into this one. Wisconsin lives in the low 80s on the season. If you stop the tape there, the over looks tempting. Here is the thing though, not all points are created equal. A lot of Wisconsin's scoring came when they were beating up on smaller programs and in that big offensive outburst against Marquette. When they have run into real resistance, the tune changes. 60 at Nebraska, 66 against Villanova, 73 in that loss to Purdue along with that ugly 4 for 25 from 3 which was not just a one-night accident. It slid into a multi-game slump that local media has been talking about. Even in the win over UCLA, which felt like an offensive showcase, they burned hot early, then cooled off hard, going just 2 for 14 from deep after the break. On the Michigan side, the story is not just they score a lot, they also guard like their lives depend on it. They are sitting at number 1 in defensive efficiency on that same analytic board, giving up roughly 67 points per game. They held USC to 66 while forcing 21 turnovers and keeping the Trojan assist numbers in single digits. That is the type of defensive pressure that can drag an opponent's output down, even if pace starts out high. If you look at how the betting totals have actually played out recently, it backs up that feeling. 8 of Michigan's last 12 games have landed under the number. 4 of their last 6 as a favorite have gone under. 4 of the last 5 meetings between Michigan and Wisconsin have also come in under the posted total. So while the headline numbers scream offense, the recent pattern in real games has leaned the other way. Stylistically, it also makes sense. Wisconsin might want to run a little more than in the past, but in a spot like this, their best realistic path is to grind the shot clock, force half-court possessions, and lean heavily on their starters. That is especially true if Austin Rapp is again limited or unavailable, because that shortens the rotation and makes every extra trip up and down the floor feel heavier. We already saw guard tighten things when Rapp was out, like in that UCLA win, and that kind of shorter bench usually nudges pace down, not up. There is also a subtle scoring effect that comes with a team like Michigan when they take control of a game. When they build a margin, they do not always chase fireworks on the scoreboard. They squeeze the opponent with defense and rebounding. Garbage time possessions turn into slower, longer trips, with reserves feeling things out and the trailing team often running half-court sets instead of flying around in chaos. That part is speculative. It is more about how this kind of matchup usually looks than a guaranteed script, but it happens to line up with the undertrend both teams have been sitting in recently. So instead of seeing this as some 165-point shootout, it feels more realistic that the game lives in the mid-150s, with one team's defense and the other team's streaky shooting combining to cap the overall scoring a bit lower than the number suggests. Think along the lines of a game where Wisconsin's three-point rhythm runs hot and cold again, possessions stay mostly in the half court, and scoring comes in punches rather than a steady avalanche. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.